I'm so excited that you've all agreed to come, and what we're doing today is really talking about Chicago and kind of the art craft scene. We're looking back really kind of to the 70s and 80s because that's really when it's emerging a lot. The focus of this is, of course, a project that is supported by the Terra Foundation's Art Design 2024 initiative, and our project was to focus on craft in Chicago in the 70s and 80s, and then also kind of bringing it into the present a bit as much as we could. So there are a number of persons that I have spoken to over the last several months, and some were really interested in participating but couldn't make today. So we're talking about actually organizing a second session with, to accommodate their schedules. So once we've got that established, we will post that, let you know, we'll share that information, because everyone's experience is different. There's been a lot of overlap actually with what you've had to say, and in my own research, but I think, let's share it with everyone and go from there. Did you have your hand up, or that was just me? I thought maybe you had your hand up. I'm sorry, that was just, got it, okay, that was just me. All right. So what I thought I would do is start out by just very generally introducing each of you. And I have to admit that some of these bios are a little uneven in length because you shared information, and then it's just, it's all good. It's all good. So I'll start just in order, I guess, in which you're seated. So Arlene at the far end, it's Arlene Raconcay, was a founding member and executive director of the Chicago Artists Coalition for over 27 years. She also was a potter and a painter. Currently, she's president of the Chicago Women's Caucus for Art. Women's Caucus for Art is a national organization, and Arlene's been very active with the Chicago chapter for a long time. Lourdes, hold on, let me grab yours. Lourdes Guerrero is a Chicago artist, storyteller, arts advocate, former educator, and avid world traveler. She has a BFA in arts education and a Master of Ed in curriculum instruction from the University of Illinois, Chicago. Her medium is primarily in fibers, crochet, weaving, knitting, knotting, wrapping, but her work has evolved to 3D fibers, painting, and photography. Eric, you're, I'm sorry, yours is so brief. No, it's just, it's not, it just, you made the list is wonderful. So I will start with your schooling, okay? You studied for 2 years as an architecture major at Iowa State University in the mid-60s, 1963 to 65. Took a 2-year hiatus after that. Enrolled at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a major in painting, where you got your BFA in 1970. Had a 1-year hiatus. Then pursued a MFA degree at Cranbrook Art Academy with a major in ceramics in 1973, which is when you arrived to Chicago and did various jobs teaching. You settled at Little Street Studio in 1975 and began extended pursuit of a life as a self-employed potter ceramic artist. And in 1997, you bought the building you're currently working in, which is a fabulous, fabulous building. You have a great workplace set up. It's just, yeah. I'm impressed by how you, I was impressed by your production kind of efficiency, like how you figured it out to be able to produce as much as you do and just make it work.
There's a curve that went up like this to where I hit my peak, where I had it figured out, and it's been like this.
Well, maybe can explain how you figured it out, some of those issues that a lot of artists struggle with, to be able to be self-sufficient making artwork. So our next participant is Indira Freitas Johnson, is in numerous private and public collections, including the Chicago MCA, Museum of Contemporary Art, RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design Museum, and the Chicago Transit Authority. And then last but not least is Fern Shaffer, born and raised in Chicago, received her BFA from the University of Illinois and MA from Columbia College. She has lectured all over the world and has published her writings. She was the president of Artemisia Gallery for over 10 years. And I think I just looked back. You became a member in 1981 and president in 1983, I believe.
Took over.
You took over, yeah.
I just took over.
And you've, of course, juried many exhibitions in the U.S. and South America. Honestly, I mean, you have a very extensive Wikipedia listing, so I thought this is very broad. If anyone wants to follow up, you can look at her bio, resume, and such. Fern Shaffer's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally in solo and group shows. She has been collected by national and international museums as well. She's on the cover of Susie Gablick's book on the reenchantment of art and has been working on environmental issues for 40 years. So, thank you. Well, that's okay. We're all up there. That's all right. That's good. That's good. It means you've seen a lot and have a lot to say, but aren't worried about it anymore. It's like, that's kind of how I would, I don't know, something I'm kind of learning maybe. So I was wondering, I'll start with a general question, and then I think maybe we can pass the mic to each other, kind of back and forth, if that seems all right with you. What I'd like to start, I mean, this is really, I think when I was speaking with each of you individually, I really wanted to ask you kind of what obstacles you saw in the Chicago art world in the 70s when you were all kind of emerging at that time, 70s, 80s, and so here. Some of you left the city for a while, some of you came back, some of you, I mean, you all each had kind of different experiences. But some of the obstacles were really, although I wasn't surprised to hear them, I felt bad that you had experienced them. They were some of the things you were told were quite shocking. But I wondered if you could kind of recap some of that, to the best of your ability, or just kind of talk about some of those issues. Arlene.
I think the 70s are very exciting times here. It was the start of all the nonprofits. Many of us, the Chicago Artists Coalition, there was Name Gallery, there was all kinds, some of them not even in existence, NAB, and the women's galleries, ARC and Artemisia. So, I mean, I think the 70s were kind of fun, and they were hectic times, too, and so on. So that's just what I wanted to just start with that, because if we're talking about the 70s, they were wonderful times that of course, now I'm looking back at it. At the time it was angst, But, so anyway, I'll just start that out.
Oh, well, I'm Lourdes. I think what I remember specifically about it is when I had been traveling and I had been living in Ireland in '77, and when I got back, that's when I had started to develop, I had already developed this technique of crochet tapestries. And I'm not a painter. I could barely draw. I had been a college dropout. I'd only been in college for 1.5 years at that time. And I wanted to try to exhibit in Chicago, and I would go into the galleries, and like the 2 or 3 that were down on Michigan Avenue. And I remember basically saying, hi, would you like to look at my slides? I'm so innocent, and I'm 20-something years old, and You do what? Well, I have crocheted tapestries, I have photographs, and I have slides. No. Have you exhibited in New York? And I was like, what? No. Have you exhibited out east, out west? And I said, no. Well, we aren't even interested in your work. And then the idea that when I then explained to them what I was doing, I said, well, it's really different, it's crocheted. Oh, we don't handle crafts. And I was just devastated. Fortunately, someone had told me about the Chicago Artists Coalition, and that's when I walked over and I met Arlene and I started volunteering, and I started finding out about all the other opportunities that really were happening. I mean, Chicago was amazing. It was so open. It really was. There seemed to be a lot of places to at least talk to people. And it was very good because it was kind of one-on-one stuff. You could just call somebody and say, can I come down? And say, yeah, come on down. So that was kind of my general experience in that early part of the 70s.
What you just said about talking to people, that kind of triggered sort of a recollection for me, because that's how everything that happened to me at the start here happened. It was just from happening into a studio by meeting a person, happening into a kind of a part-time teaching job opportunity by talking to somebody who knew the guy I just talked to about something else. And it was all through the contacts with people who were kind of in the community, which was sort of growing and happening at the time. And it was a kind of wonderful timing. When I finished graduate school, which was 73, the kind of, by then, sort of fictional image that we had of what you do is you get your undergraduate degree, you go to graduate school, you get that Master of Fine Arts degree, you go get yourself a nice teaching job in a university somewhere, which was the dream. And people not too long before my crowd in 1973 had been doing just that, because they're in the crafts were booming in a lot of colleges across the country. It was a thing that it had started with the GI Bill, I think, after the war, and it had just sort of kind of caught on, and it was really occurring. But the impression I had was all those jobs got filled about 2 years before I got there, and then you had to think of something else. So it was a little bit of a long process, but the people that I met, just by just finding one entry point into the community of people who were making crafts or doing art, and then all the rest of it, you just kind of, talk to this person, talk to that one. It all kind of fell together, and it's pretty much how everything else that I've ended up being able to take advantage of has happened for me.
I think I've had there's some similarity in some of the experiences that everyone had, but there's a lot of difference in the sense that I had been living in Sweden. After graduation, my husband we went to India, and then he was in Sweden studying at the University of Lund, and I had exhibited in Sweden. And he was a painter, so we would go to various galleries, and they would accept his work and then my work. So coming here and learning that there was a difference between craft and art was very confusing. Like, I couldn't understand why this was happening. I had the same kind of work. And it was still, I would be told that this is the gallery that you should go to, which was a gallery that only dealt with ceramic, Whilst I thought my work fit into just the art scene in general. So that was something that I sort of struggled against. I was very isolated. I had 2 kids and was very involved with them, especially my younger son had some health issues at a younger age. And so I really wasn't involved in the art community. I had no clue that there were other galleries that I could try or where else I could go, and didn't have that much communication with other artists. I used to go to the Evanston Art Center, and that's where I met Eric, and he was one of the people that helped just in my understanding about, because I didn't know anything about clay here or about glazes or anything, and he was very supportive of that. But I think that has been my struggle throughout, just trying to see why there was that difference between the two, between art and craft, which to me was, I don't know, I couldn't understand that. Also, I think that you are automatically, especially when you're starting out, you're put into a box, and this is the box that you're in. And it's very hard to move outside that box, and I think that's been one of the things that I've learned how to do.
Thank you. My experience is more similar to yours.
Yeah.
I majored in art and always knew I'd be an artist. And then I was at college, and then I got married, and I had 3 kids. And in that period, you really couldn't do anything because they were all under 5 years old. So I became very involved with the PTA and having ideas and bringing art into the schools. And as soon as they were in school all day long, I too joined the Evanston Art Center, and I met Corey Postiglione, whose piece is hanging on the wall. And Corey had just started a class, and they were all women, and we were all close to the same age and had the same kind of experiences, majored in art, but were home taking care of our children. So we formed like an art group, and this was my support system. As we continued for years in this group, it began to be time to go downtown. So yes, when I went to galleries, they saw me as a married woman with children, and isn't that sweet, and go home. And so my friends started getting into galleries, but not I, because my ideas are a little bit out, really a little bit further out than most galleries could see. And the opportunity to join Artemisia came before me, and I jumped at it. It was a whole learning experience that was incredible. And I was there for 12 years. And I was able to take the gallery from this spot to this spot, because the way that I viewed things, it was really important. And I worked on the New Art Examiner when it first started also. So I'm not a writer, but Derek and I became friends, and so I was able to clean up the messes that he created. He's just a wild old man. And so I knew everybody in the city. By the time I became president of Artemisia, all the gallery dealers and I were all friends at this point. So being a woman was really, and from Chicago, against New York was really a problem at that time. We were very fortunate in Chicago because the speakers that went to New York to speak stopped in Chicago and went to California. So I was able to capture great people to come to Artemisia to show and to speak. So we became more involved in a larger community. And Arlene, your group was great, and the Women's Caucus for Art. I mean, there were really it was very exciting. And maybe you remember it, and if you don't, I'm sorry you missed it.
I was wondering if you could, Fern, you mentioned something about the Chicago-New York relationship, and I wondered if you could add a little more to that.
What we learned at that point is that, which was bad advice, that you put your slides together and then you send them to all the galleries. And the galleries looked at I don't even think they opened the envelopes before they tossed them. So how do you get into a New York gallery? Because that was the center of the art scene. And I don't know who decided that Chicago was the second city, because it's not true. And I find that the New York circle was really a very tight group of people. And you really couldn't break through until someone introduced you or someone stood up for you. So that was very hard if you had no connections. I still talk to my friends from New York, and their situations are really no different than mine or anybody else in Chicago. New York gallery system is based on money, and if you had money, you had a chance to buy your way in, or do things. And it was very factory orientated. Andy Warhol started his factory. The artists in New York have people working for them like crazy, so it's not that kind of a situation. I don't have anybody working for me. I'd like to. So anybody that wants to volunteer.
Quick question, what do you mean by buy your way in New York specifically? Yeah.
If you're working with a dealer and he accepts you, let's say you want a full-color page in Art in America, then you say, oh, I can do that, and the artist pays for it. Or the wealthier people, and they have us in Chicago too. Some of the Chicago galleries were supported by very wealthy artists who she kept hidden in a sense, and saying that it was her that was doing the advertisement and paying. Your friends are very, very interested in what you're doing, and they have money, so they buy a piece. It's not a big deal to lay down $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for a painting because it's a token of your friendship. Today it's millions. But then in the 70s, you could do that. So the more people that bought your art, the more the gallery sold it. So there was money involved. If you come from a poor source and you have no money to do it, who are you inviting to your exhibitions? They just walk in and walk out. So I think it's business. It's the economics of the situation. We are a huge industry of millions and millions of dollars invested in art.
No, thank you. No, that's, I was, I'm glad you explained that, because I don't think that economic component is made very transparent, and how it affects artists' careers, actually, and kind of how their work gets assessed or placed or excluded or included and so on.
How much money does it cost to put up a website and a designer? How much money does it cost to have somebody review your statements or your resume? I didn't know those things. I just struggled along to try and do it the best way I can. But I look at something and go, how did she do that? And probably with a lot of help that's not talked about. You know, I was friends with Susie Gablick, and Susie is a very famous writer. But she too suffered too from, she decided to write a book that her dealers didn't like, so they rejected it. But at this point, Susie had enough of a reputation.
Components of creative
So we're back to
processes
money
that are
again.
subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're back to money. Arlene, I wondered if I could ask you to explain how you how you let people know about the Chicago Artists Coalition, because when we spoke, what stands in my memory is your printing up flyers and going on public transit, train, bus, whatever, and asking people just sitting in the seats, hey, are you an artist? And hey, do you know about the Chicago Artists Coalition? And you'd hand them a flyer. And just that kind of activism, which I think was more common or more open in Chicago at the time, and also just being able to talk to everybody. And I wondered if you could explain a little bit more about that, if I haven't kind of, maybe don't remember.
Well, of course, it was safer on the L's than it is today. I don't know how well, the thing is that it was just the times. This was just the time that people wanted an organization like ours, because we were like the middleman. We told people where to go. We'd look at their slides. In those days, it was slides. And we'd look at their slides. And we had a slide registry. And we also advertised and told people to come up and look at them. People would come, and we had book publishers. We had all kinds of people looking at the slides and of the artists. And I don't know how we did this. We just kept, like I said, it was just the times were ripe for this. Artists wanted to know. Yeah, you're going to add to this because she worked with us, you know. But people wanted this information. And then that's why we first started with a newsletter, then we went to a newspaper. And we try to think of everything. We try to think of what if you need legal help? Well, you know, lawyers for the creative arts. People didn't know about that because they were just starting out too. I mean, you know, everybody was just starting. It was just a wonderful time in those days. And so we just kept thinking all the things that we could do to help artists. You know, and so that's I don't know if I'm answering it exactly, but this is what we did, and what we had other things.
Here,
We had a slide. We had a.
Let me add to it.
Right.
You know.
To see Arlene going back and forth, because she lives in Skokie, she would take the L, and she'd be on the L, and she would always have these big bags. And all you guys probably remember seeing Arlene's walking around with her purse and her big shopping bags, and it would be, you know, any leftover newsletters that we hadn't sold, or that, you know, sometimes there was a run of 1,500, you know, it was depending on how many, old newsletters, application forms, and then a flyer about maybe a Business of Art conference that was coming up in a few months. And then if she saw somebody with a portfolio, it was like, oh, you're a student, you need to join. And I was like, God, this woman has no shame. You know? But the other thing that I remember too is we regularly went, because the galleries were all pretty much, a lot of the new galleries were all pretty much in the same area. And so we'd go to the gallery openings on Friday, we'd leave work, and it became my job, kind of, to go with Arlene, and she'd have application forms, and then she would say, oh, they want to pay right now. And okay, I was a membership person, so I would be walking around with, you know, 10 or 15 bucks from that person, another 10 or 15 from that person, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope I make it home without getting robbed. You know, I mean, and I'd have money, I'd have cash in my purse that I would then process on Monday when I got back to work. But it really was, Arlene would just go to gallery openings and she'd say, that person's not on our slide registry. And then she'd just go up to them and say, hi, my name is Arlene. Here's an application form. You have to join the Chicago Artists Coalition. Like, oh, Arlene.
We left stuff everywhere.
Oh yeah, you always left stuff everywhere. So that was a big part. That was a huge part of it. But it was also the things that we had. Like you say, the newsletter, the slide registry. We'd get phone calls from people, and we'd sit and talk to parents, whose kids had graduated from college, and they were sitting there with, you know, they were saying, what is my kid going to do? Is she just going to splash paint on paper, and now I'm going to have to support them for the rest of their lives? And you know, and Arlene would say, oh no, you know, they could get in graphic design, they could do this, look at all the gallery opportunities. So to be able to sometimes speak to the parents were really, you know, helpful in confirming to them that, you know, there was a career, there was a life in the arts. That's what I remember.
We also had a Business of Art conference every year. We had, and Ruth Taliber was one of our founding members, and she was an accountant. And we'd always have an accounting class every year, faithfully, and, you know, tell artists how to do their income tax. I mean, you know, they were like, you know, they couldn't understand any of this stuff. And so, I mean, we were just trying to make them become business people, is really what it was. You know, and what else? We had all sorts of programs. We had various programs, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, the Business of Art conference was really big because we would talk about contracts and how to, contracts. So we'd have someone talking about doing your books and how to keep receipts. The Chicago Artists Coalition started to print a little booklet that was like a bookkeeping. So it would have every page in it with a couple of extras, and it would be just empty lines. You know, your publicity, your expenses, your travel, your food. You know, because you're traveling somewhere. So think as a business person, not just like, oh my God, I just want to create art. You know, I mean, that's really nice too, but you have to do that. Contracts was a big thing. Who were the other people who came? I'm trying to think.
We had publishers used to come.
Oh, how to photograph art,
How to
too. Oh,
photograph
my
your art.
God.
Yeah, we had that too, yeah.
That was horrific. The
Yes,
stuff
right.
that we'd get from people. And we're looking at these slides and we're like, oh my God, you took it out on your back porch. You know, I can see a tree and I can see your piece is about this big. You know, it's like, oh my God, they need to learn how to photograph their work. So, yeah,
Yeah, we wanted to teach them how to be professional,
Yeah.
is what it was, yeah.
that's what it was.
And we have various books, we published all kinds of books.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
Business of Art,
Resource,
yeah.
artist resource
Artist
books?
resource
Oh, I
book,
did a
yes.
couple on that. I would
Yeah,
have done a
yeah.
couple of those.
Yeah,
What
it
else?
Was
was.
there one also on like safety practices?
No,
Oh,
actually.
no, we had programs though on
Program.
it. Yes, we had programs, you know, especially if you're a ceramicist, you know, and you're inhaling all this gook, you know, and stuff like that. you know.
But there was somebody who did publish a book, Hazards in the Arts, remember?
Yes,
And then
that's
I
right,
think
there
we
was.
tried to sell it with, you know, just to kind of promote
Right,
it.
right.
Because that was
right,
pretty,
Right.
yeah, that was good, especially in the ceramics, you know, and.
I don't know if, well, this is again a memory question. How did you organize the slides? Was it by medium, by name? Like how could, like if someone was coming and had some idea, you know, okay, I want to organize a show on a subject, let's say not landscape, okay? But they don't know how to find landscape, let's say in painting, you know, all these, how would you find it?
Do you remember? We had lists. We had lists of the artists and what they did. And then we had files of their work.
Yeah.
And so when somebody would come, we'd ask them, what are you looking for? You know, and it depends what, you know, whatever it was.
Oh, yeah,
It's-
that was really something.
Mostly it
When
was
we,
in our head.
when we, I'm sorry, Arlene, when I got started.
Computers.
I know. When I started working at CAC, it was in alphabetical order.
By artist name?
By artist name, last name first. And then if a woman got married, which of course she did, and then we'd lose them. You know, we'd lose them. I would have like little notes to myself, you know, with a piece of paper saying, you know, this is what her maiden name was and this is now her new name. I mean, and it was in alphabetical order. But when I started, we were also, Arlene was like convinced we have to do things by computer. And so we started. Well, you kept saying this is, yeah, I mean, not that you could, we had some of the first computer systems. Before Unix, we had Star System and a database, and I actually sat down and looked at categories and wrote, I guess, what now would be called a database for the programs. And here, I'm a fiber artist. I crochet, and at that point, I think I was a mom too. But I organized it, and then we did put the slides in general categories, painting, sculpture. But the computer was the one that allowed us to be able to kind of tab it. So if you did sculpture and landscape and portrait painting, you might have 3 different categories or 4 different categories, or if you did graphic design, 5 different, 6 different. So that's part of the reason why the membership form had all those little squares on it. You'd have to mark them all off, because recent college graduates would say, "Oh, I do everything." No, you got to be more specific. Because I would sit there and enter it, and then when someone would come and ask, I could pull up a list. And I would say, okay, now I have a list. Now, what are you looking for? Oh, I want large work. Okay, let's see if I can find people who did large work. And a lot of this, you're right, it was in our brains. We would remember, we would say, oh, we were just at a show last week, and we saw that they did something like, would you like their name? And then you'll contact them and see if that would help. But we did want people to come down. I mean, we had people come to the office, and we would try to leave them with just the slides and say, you know, take a look at these, and show them how to look at how to use a loop, and, you know, have the light box and do all that. So yeah, that's a good question. Oh my gosh.
Well, I asked about the categories because, Indira, you mentioned you didn't understand, you know, coming into this country with this kind of separation between art and craft. And I know from my own schooling and such that there is, you know, that craft kind of has its own category, and I've never understood either. Sometimes it's not included as art, which I've never understood either. But sometimes that is influenced by actually the classification systems, you know, how things are organized in a library.
Yeah, and that's an issue too, because my work is fiber, and but I don't think of myself as just crocheter. So I think I remember looking at your slides and thinking, well, it's figurative. You know, there's stories. I would look at those things and say, it's not just this one category, because we go beyond that. You know, it's not. Yeah.
So I thought of myself as a sculptor.
Yeah, or sculptor.
And so I couldn't understand the categories.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I say one more?
Oh, she wants to say something.
Okay. Also, about this time, there was an organization, they had the SOFA was called, and I really believe that they got started because there was no place at the other exhibition.
Art Expo.
Art Expo,
Art Expo.
you know, for crafts or whatever. And so that's how I know that they got started. And I mean, to me, that was the best show. I went to the SOFA show for years and years because I loved it. It was so much more interesting than just looking at paintings. You know, there was just more to it. I'm sorry. Okay, go on.
Yeah.
It was a sculpture. But yes, so I thought of myself as a sculptor, and so that was, I think, the issue that I was facing. I think part of it, I did get into a number of galleries, but I think that was pure luck, being in the right place. I remember the very first gallery was Phyllis Needleman. I don't know if anyone remembered her. And I happened to be walking around with my image slides, and I went in there, and someone who was going to have a show at her gallery it had fallen through. And she said, we have an opening like next week or something, and do you have work? And of course I had work, so that's how I got in with Phyllis. So I think some of that was just being at the right place. But I think I also very consciously decided that I realized I could not compete in this market after having gone to various galleries and everything. I didn't want to be in there. A lot of times, not having a art history or anything background, I'd go in there to some of the galleries and look at the work and say, what is that? And I didn't want to do work like that, So automatically, I think I rejected that scene and instead went more with, I really enjoy working with community, sort of figuring out how, I grew up in a family where my father was a follower of the teachings of Gandhi, and so we learned nonviolence practice, and so I wanted to know how could I continue to do that using art. So I think I consciously went in a different direction because I couldn't figure out how to compete in the art world. So I think that was sort of a different decision.
There is another avenue.
Yeah, one second.
Go ahead.
So Indira, you said something earlier about the art and craft difference, and there is actually a difference. Whether it's a difference that any artist or a serious craftsperson would accept is another question. If you're trying to sell your work, there's a difference. And I found that the most successful avenue that I arrived at were the wholesale craft fairs. The American Crafts Council runs some of them. There's another organization, the Rosen shows they were called. They were run by Wendy Rosen, but I think she had a different name for her organization. But these are, they're a bit of a crossover. Just like the Art on the Pier is a bit of a crossover. It's not quite a gallery. It's not quite an art fair. It's in between somewhere. That's what these are, but they're directed primarily at people who are in the business of selling arts or crafts, not so much the retail customer. And they're selective. They can be difficult to get into. I tried for a number of years to get in before I finally kind of cracked the nut. That's another issue, but the quality of your photography makes an enormous difference. I sat on some juries where I was looking at work that people were proposing, and I accepted a couple of things in my mind the first moment when I saw them, and then realized what it is, because I knew this work. And I thought, oh my gosh, these things are horrible. I hate these. But they were bright colors, they were properly photographed, real big and bold, and it blasted you right in the eyeball when you saw it. And the reverse happens. If you have photographs that are not kind of up to snuff, you may as well not even send them, because they don't get seen. But these wholesale craft fairs are a place where you would set up a display. I would go with a line of work that I was proposing to make. This is my compromise. I'm not being an artist like I learned to be in graduate school, you know, where everything I made was precious, and its value was that I made it. This is a little bit different. You're making work that people who can accept the idea of paying more, paying $30 for a mug instead of $2.50, will pay that little extra to have it be made by somebody who's given it some personal kind of definition. When these were successful, I had a run of a number of years where I could go to one show and just about book a whole year's worth of work. That would be, I was leaving myself enough room in that year so that I have maybe 20 or maybe 40% of my time to make other things as well, to experiment, to make things that might fail, to take chances, to see what else I can come up with. But I had, it's like having a backer, only the backer was me. But I knew this work was sold. I had parceled out by the month throughout the year. That was the most solid footing that I had ever ended up on, was when these things were working for me. After a while, it got so that I knew the people that I could sell this work to, and these relationships kind of, they abide, you know, they can continue. I didn't necessarily have to appear at the show every year for them to understand that they could sell what I make, and so it builds you build a little bit of a following for yourself. But without that, I think to do work the way I was doing, basically, you know, making craft objects and then trying to leave myself enough time to experiment, would be very hard to do, because you just can't sell enough of it. I can't sell a mug for $400. I can't sell a big bowl for $5,000, which is what you would have to do in order to be able to actually make them. So this was an alternative, and it ended up being, it's what allowed me to decide that I could be a self-employed artist.
To what, I'll speak loudly, maybe I don't have to move the mic. To what, or was there any, were there any suggestions made to you about kind of what to produce or how to change your line or anything like that because you were going to these fairs? Like how much, you know, how much autonomy did you have to decide what to make and this, you know, how it looked and so on?
I think the fact that I had been, by this time I'd already been working for 10 or 15 years. I knew what I could make, and I knew what I wanted to make. I knew how I liked it to look. I was pretty single-minded about, I'm not making something that somebody else is going to specify for me. I want to make it the way I want to make it. But I did have, making a mug or a plate, a set of dinnerware, rather than making a single sculptural ceramic piece that's going to hang on the wall by itself and never be repeated, that's a choice, because you could do either. And I decided that the one-of-a-kind work, to sell for enough and to sell enough of them that this is viable was just about an impossible quest. So the way that I went was there's that compromise to begin with. I'm gonna be kind of a production craft person. I was perfectly happy with that because what I wanted to do was make the work. So as far as what it looked like, I decided. I don't recall anyone ever coming to me and saying, if I would just make this tweak or just make these changes or do a little of this, a little of that, that I can really sell this for you, because I wouldn't have been interested. But I knew that I could design these things and make them, and I now could see that there is an avenue for me. I can also see ground for artists and for those people who can sell it.
Eric, at your kind of peak of production, were you employing assistants?
I had one helper. That was the most I'd had. And when I got my own building, then it was quite nice, because I could give a helper a space to work. I could provide them with access to all of my infrastructure, to the kiln and whatnot, all of which is expensive to do if you're on your own. And then I could get a certain number of hours worth of work out from that person in exchange for access to all the studio benefits. And then if it was worth more than that, then I could pay them for certain things that they could help me make. And all of that could be balanced out and could be made to work.
Did you ever experience any kind of, I don't know, attitude or, kind of stigma for, working more towards these fairs and selling and such, if you wanted to show your work in, say, like a fine art gallery that was focused on style and that kind of one-of-a-kind work?
I think that was pretty much a choice I made myself. And I didn't feel like I was compromising, really. I never felt like the work that I was making, I wasn't going to be Peter Voulkos. He was the great guru of the American bursting ceramic art scene, and could make a big platter, and it would sell in a gallery for $10,000, or by now, who knows, much more. I didn't see myself hitting that mark. There's no reason not to aspire to that, I suppose. I thought that that's not going to happen. And I didn't really feel like that was a need that I had. I needed to work with my hands. I needed to make something. I think if I wasn't doing what I did with clay, I could have made furniture, I could have worked with wood, I could have built some other thing. Anything that was hands-on was gonna, that was gonna ring the bell for me. That was all good. So I felt I was pretty content with having a line of wholesale work, which would be the work that I would take to one of these shows, and try and figure it out so that I still have some time to do other things, make something that I consider sculpture, and if anybody else feels the same way about it, that's wonderful. If they don't, well, doesn't matter, because I also have a job, So it all,
No, finish your thought.
it felt like a good place for me to settle, which is pretty much what I did.
Thank you. Indira,
So what I was going to say, just hearing what Eric is saying, there was at that time, and I don't know now if the craft was considered in a slightly derogatory, the word craft. And that was something else that I didn't understand, because where I grew up, you think of every object, the object that you're drinking from, that you're wearing, is all beautiful crafts. You know, they're beautiful objects. And so I couldn't understand why that was lesser than something else. So I think that was one of the other things that has now changed, I think, in the art world, and there isn't that division in such a stark manner of saying this is less than and this is more than, you know, so. And I know Eric's work, at least from that a lot, 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
It's a number of years.
Which is beautiful. So, so I think that whole division between craft and art was very rampant at that time. Lots of books written about it, and philosophers, and
Just, can I add one thing?
please.
Just as a sidebar, I hope that you've all seen Craft in America, which is a series of shows, television shows on public TV about crafts in America. Actually, it turns out Diane's cousin and her husband are prominently on the crew of making that show. So we see them all, and they're wonderful. And there's an extraordinary range of work that fits under this, you know, this rubric, whatever, of craft. It's beautiful, very individual. Some people do things and reproduce them. Others make strictly one-of-a-kind objects that take months to make. A whole range. I think a lot of that is work that it doesn't ever hit what you would consider the New York Art Magazine pages, or the world of the collectibles. It's not quite quite the work that would be in one of the wholesale craft fairs. It's somewhere else, but it's like you say. Why even bother with the difference? 'Cause there's so much value of all of it.
I'd like to say that the choice that you made was great because you got to live on the things that you love doing.
Yeah,
And I realized very early that I couldn't sell my work. So I had to find a job. So that made it more complicated because you have a job from 9 to 5, and then you spend your evenings in the studio painting, and that's the way that I've had to live. And Artemisia allowed me to have that freedom to paint whatever I did. When I did go to some dealers, she would say, "Oh, no, we can't take any black paintings at all." And I go, "Oh, that's my favorite color," you know? So, I mean, it was, we can't sell that. And I go, okay, but it didn't stop me from doing what my ideas were. So my ideas switched over from that because I couldn't figure out, I wasn't clever enough to figure out what I could make that would sell. So I went into teaching. So I taught for 30 years and maintained a studio and worked at night. So I missed a lot of television, but I'm making up for it.
Oops, I think,
First, I wanted to say, Eric, I always admired potters because I would see potters who would come into the Chicago Artists Coalition, and they were just so prolific, and it was a job. I mean, that's the thing that I began to learn when I was, because I always felt like I was the younger one, and I would see, at the time I didn't have kids, but I do remember seeing many women who, they didn't start working until after their kids started going to school. Of course, that was what you had to do, and then but when they started doing their work, it was a job. Kids walked out the door, or you woke up in the morning and you were at that wheel, or you were whatever it was, you were concentrating. And I thought, my God, what an amazing thing to think about art, not just as this free thing that you want to do, but just it's a job, and you want to do it, you got to take it seriously. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I got to do something with my hands. Yeah. Painting it doesn't, it's very visual and very, very mind-oriented, but it's not my hands. I need my hands in there. And that's what I always felt was like, that's why crocheting was what I did. Crocheting is, it was my security blanket. I would get all my hooks out and yarns. I travel places, I always got to have something. I got to have something in my hand. I can't not have something in my hand. And that idea of constantly working so hard all the time was something I really learned from the art world during these times, because I've never really put that away. It was always something. I don't know how I made a living. I'm just thinking about it. I make a living.
Well, you can't turn off creativity.
No, that's
You just can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And something also Eric said, this was your job. I mean, you just so happened to be a creative person. You weren't a stockbroker. You weren't an engineer. You weren't whatever it is. But you had to keep doing this. And I had been married to an artist, and I mean, he would have loved to have gone to New York, and he would have loved to have been in the limelight, but that isn't exactly what he really wanted to do. He wanted to create. And that was, and so, and the way to sell our work was through art fairs. I mean, it may not be the best thing in the world, but we earned a living. I mean, we had kids, we had a house, we had everything, But so what? So maybe somebody will discover me, he'll say, and whatever. But it didn't make any difference because he would still be painting. That was the thing.
Arlene, I recall you mentioning a while back that sometimes you get these reaction, oh, the Chicago Artists Coalition, you're not artists because you had day jobs. And I wondered if you could, well, these kind of internal, like reactions within Chicago's kind of art community. And I have to admit, I've gone through like a lot of, maybe the first 10 years or so of every issue of the New Art Examiner for my research. I'm not done yet, but I read the editorials and things like that, and there was, sometimes you'd see an editorial where an artist would write, oh, my goal is to be able to, like, you were so lucky to be able to make art, like art as your job, like all the time. That would be my goal, but I have this other job because it pays for health insurance or things like that, or pays better, more consistent income. And, but that sometimes artists who were not able to have, a separate, I think, Fern, you also mentioned this, that you had to have a studio outside your home. That was also a stigma. If you had a studio in your home, you were thought to not be serious. You had to have a studio somewhere, I wondered if you could maybe input on that a little bit.
Well, let's see. What have I done? I used to work at Walgreens early on. I did that for a few years. I worked as office manager, bookkeeper, membership secretary for Chicago Artists Coalition, off and on for 10 years, which was fortunate because when I had kids, I brought my kids to the office. My son.
I'd always say, shut him up.
I'd nurse my son and put him on a blanket under the desk while I'd answer the phone, and I'd be like, you gotta be quiet, sweetheart. So I did that. I waited on tables for bartended. And then fortunately, my husband, who was very supportive of my work, I finally went back and got my bachelor's, my BFA in art education, and I said, okay, I was doing a lot of volunteer work with my kids' school, and I said, I want to teach art, and I want to teach because I have this passion, and I'm talking about my work all the time, and people can never figure out what it is that I do, so I found myself actually being offered a couple of jobs, and then they found out that I didn't have a degree, so I thought, well, okay, maybe it's time. So I went back and I got my BFA, and I started teaching at the Chicago Public School. I taught high school art for 10 years. I went back and got my master's in education because I wanted to know more about curriculum. I wanted to have the power to to manipulate my curriculum the way I wanted it, the way I wanted to teach kids, because I felt like I grew up on the West Side and I didn't have art. We didn't have any art. And so my art was just, everything. It was my grandmother's crocheting. It was photographs that I saw in magazines. And I thought kids needed to see that the art world was a beautiful world that you can actually become part of. So then I did teach for a while. So and then I did that for 10 years until I got fired, and because I have a big mouth. So I taught at School of the Art Institute. I taught at Columbia for a little while. And between all that, I always taught crochet and knitting at a variety of places. I would do weaving workshop when that was still around. I taught at I would teach at art, I think Triangle Art Center, or I would just pick up any odds and ends of crochet and knitting and weaving. Well, weaving I'm still learning, but I just did all those jobs, all kind of in between. So anything that I could do, and I would tell parents, by the way, as now that I think about it, when their kids would get freaked out about being art, that their kids wanted to be in the arts, I would say, your child has to be as creative finding the job, creating the job, as they are in their work. And if they want to really make a living in the arts, they can do it. But they have to be as creative. They can't just say, oh, nobody's hiring me. They got to make the job. And that's what I figured out. I think. First.
Oh, did you want? No.
Oh, no.
So going back just as far as the beginning, all through school, high school, I used to get 0 in art, mainly because I couldn't draw the way that my teacher wanted me to draw. She'd set up a still life, and she would call me a liar because my work did not reflect that still life. And yet, when I graduated from high school, my father said, you'll go to art. My father was an artist, and so the tradition in India is that the eldest son follows in his father's footsteps. Now, my father didn't have any sons, and I was the second one because my oldest sister had health issues. And so I just started to go to art school. I always thought of myself as an artist, in spite of getting the 0 in art. But he wanted this whole idea of earning a living, and so he thought the only way to earn a living in art was to be in the advertising field. And so that's how I was in advertising design. And it did help because while my husband was in school at the University of Lund or at the University of Denver, I worked for some major ad agencies and was able to support our family because of that. But after that, once our second son was born, then I gave that up and started to try to do art. And I think everyone in the family knew how important that was, because if I was in a bad mood, my son would come home from school and say, Mom, you didn't get a chance to work, right? That's why I'm in such a bad mood, because it was that my mood was influenced by whether I had a chance to work in art. Mm-hmm. And basically, that. As some of us, immediately you have a family, then you have so many family responsibilities. And so that, while I didn't have a job outside the house, that was my job till I started a peace foundation called the Shanti Foundation for Peace. And our mission was to teach nonviolence through the arts, because I thought that art and nonviolence had so many things in common. And so that's what I did for like more than 10 years, working in public schools in the Chicago and Evanston area. And then finally, after the kids were all grown up and everything, was able to devote more time to just making art.
Yeah. I was just going to say, we find art wherever we can, because I ended up teaching, but not in a school. I worked with severely mentally handicapped people for a couple of years. And I only had a small class, 4 or 5 people, but it showed letting them find their way to express themselves. I had one young man who was schizophrenic, but he graduated from Harvard, summa cum laude, and he was in the middle of medical school when this disease. So when he came into my class, I know he was heavy and he was drooling, but I kept thinking, this is a wonderful mind. So, and I was going to getting my master's at that time. I would give him my papers to correct. I would give him all sorts of things to do, and talk to him about artists, and he would go to the library and he'd get a book on Rembrandt and he would copy every single painting. I mean, not well, but if he kept doing it, which he did, he got better. But using art to reach people is what we do. And when that organization closed, I went to work for a nursing home that did not have anything in it. No, they had no activities or anything, and they were Holocaust survivors. So this was another area which I developed a whole set of programs for them, and it's because of the art that I had this stimulation to bring to them, no matter what we did, whether it was cooking or if it was baking or if it was making art. I really had an art class. In the beginning, they were younger, so I had, 15 people painting, and that's the way that we did it. So I could be stimulated during the day and make money, and then I had to go home and make art, And that's what happens. You just can't help yourself. You need to have something. And I, too, like to feel and draw and paint and knit and wonderful things. I'm very happy that that's my life.
I think we have a question.
I'd just like to say, it's a shame that there isn't a group like Chicago Artists Coalition was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
I was a member in the early 80s. You were open to everyone. There's still a CAC today, but it's like an exclusive group. You can't just walk in and join, You guys did a great job.
Thank you very much.
Like, I have a question, actually. Is there any place in the city where one can go and look at, JPEGs now, images of artwork, if you want to curate? Is anyone aware of that? Because I'm not. My sense is that there is no central place to go anymore. No. Yeah.
Doesn't the library have something, the Chicago Library?
I don't know.
You can submit your work. They used to. I haven't done it in a while, so maybe it's not existing anymore?
I don't know.
There
That's
was something like, I recall that.
Yeah.
That the public library invited artists to, I never quite got my act together to do that, but I remember seeing those advertisements asking artists to
I think the
submit.
city of Chicago had that also,
Yeah.
didn't they? That
Oh,
you could
sorry.
send your slides
Yeah.
into the city, but I think it's not current.
It's not curated.
It's not,
It's not curated and it's
Okay.
not current.
okay.
It's a good idea, why don't you start?
Well, we'd probably love to do it if we had more staff to help,
Now we're back to money, right?
Yeah, we are back to funding. You're
Yeah,
right.
funding, that's
You're
what
right.
we call money, is the funding to do all that.
Yeah, because I just think it, it opens up curation and to so many possibilities because people have different ideas, are coming, with from different media, and you can, it just kind of keeps moving forward, keeping that creative process and,
I think it's a lot of it is word of mouth.
Yeah.
You meet an artist and then they say, well, my
Right.
friend does this, why don't you look at that?
Right,
I
right.
mean, that's how we need to support each other. People had interesting work. It wasn't polished, it wasn't necessarily finished, and it wasn't, but it was interesting. And NAB is, one of the ones, they had an odd space. So if you went there, you saw work that you wouldn't normally see. That's different today.
Yeah, they had performance art.
Oh, I love performance art, yeah.
I noticed that, I think 3 or 4 of you mentioned Evanston, and the Evanston Art Center taking classes and such, and I know it's moved, and I wonder if you could talk about Evanston. I mean, there's so much, certainly clay work, there was a lot there, the Midwest Potters group was there. And I wonder if there was something kind of unique about that area.
So recently what's happened is an organization has started in Evanston that's very, very active over the last 5 years called Evanston Made. I don't know if anyone else, but they are constantly, pretty much every week, doing something. Last year they were able to get a large space where the cinema was on Davis, I think. That was like a 2-story building that was vacant. And they were able to get the commercial property owner to give them the space for free and continue the insurance for the whole month of December. And so then they had invited artists from all over Evanston to come and exhibit work, and they were selling it. And now they have another space that's much smaller on the corner of Dempster and Maple, I think. That again, that they just closed a photography show, now they're going to have another show. So it's becoming much more active, and now the old Evanston Art Center has become the book house.
Yes.
And that's, I just went in there, they do this fabulous thing for Halloween, and it's really beautiful, you know, and so it's a very vibrant community, and the Art Center has also become much more, I don't want to say expansive, inclusive, and I think that has grown over the years. I'm on the Evanston Arts Council, and the council is very active as well in promoting certain types of neighborhood grants and trying to get enough money for various activities. So I think it's sort of thriving with art. And the partnership between the arts community, like Evanston Made, and the business community has been very good, because the businesses see how much they benefit from the artists.
How are they? Could you give us some examples of how they're benefiting?
So I think it's because people come in there and then they automatically want to eat at a neighborhood place, or they see a store next door that they are interested in. There are lots of, Evanston has a ton of restaurants, so I think that business has thrived, especially now, you know, over the years with COVID. I think everything suffered, and so they were really trying to see how could they get people to come back into the city. So, I mean, there are lots of things that need to be improved, but I think this is something that is going well.
I think it was because the people that were teaching at the Evanston Arts Center were teachers that maybe couldn't get a job at the Art Institute. They were all professional artists coming there to teach. So word of mouth becomes like that is a place to go. For me, I had to be close to where I lived, and I could go when my kids were in school all day. That was the first time I went back to my art. And I was very graphically, I was very happy about the whole thing. And the people they attracted were exactly me. You know, women that had gone and studied art all through school and had children and had to go home, somebody had to take care of them. And went back to it. And I'm still friends with these women. You know, it's 40, 50 years already. But the Evanston Arts Center just drew interesting people to it. The whole community was set up for it. Other areas, well, maybe Forest Park, or is it Oak Park might have something like that? Oak Park might be another community. There are communities that art needs to exist. So the call for art is just so strong. It's got to be there. And it does affect business. I mean, it's a multi-million or billion-dollar business at the moment. It's important.
Question for you? Oh, you go. Well, I guess, you know, that's a good question, but I was thinking, how about you guys? How do you find artists to put in your gallery?
Here at the Institute? It's a combination of
People annoying her?
No, I forget to use this too. Well, there are a few ways that it happens. The most straightforward way is we have an open application process. Actually, on our homepage, you go to the bottom, and it says apply for an exhibition or how to apply for an exhibition. You click on it, and there are instructions, how to, you know, what we look for in application. Because we all use computers now, we ask for JPEGs, minimum of 300 DPI, because we need a certain resolution level to be able to really look at the work. Sometimes if work is kind of sculptural, if it's been shown elsewhere, an installation photo can be very helpful, because we realize that some of our artists have not been here, and so they're not aware of, for example, in the other gallery, the curved wall, which sometimes can really changes a sense of space once you kind of step into it and you think, oh, I've got 4 walls, or we're going to be a group show, and we'll put, work here, here, here. And then you enter the space and you're like, oh, there's this curved wall. and it just changes that relationship a little bit. So that can be helpful too. But we have a pretty straightforward instructions. Some works are also curated in-house. So sometimes a curator, sometimes it's me, or Christina has curated this exhibit, but it can be others who would like to curate, then that's something we can work with them on, because every space has its own kind of idiosyncrasies. Not all our walls are drywall, some are plaster, some are, things like that, they seem really basic, but for an artist who has maybe work that's a little bit heavy, you would need to know that, well, we probably shouldn't hang that on the the wall with the drywall. We need to hang it on the other side, and then that affects the relationship with other artists in that show. So there are these kind of technical components that are not seen by the public, when they visit or review, or you have artist talks, but they actually are all part of the back scenes planning prior to. Ceiling height becomes important, lighting becomes important, all these kind of things. So we'll talk to, if someone is interested. We make time. People come in all the time and say, okay, we're having a meeting with so-and-so, and, thinking about a show on NFTs, like computer-generated work. Because we showed, I think it was 1979, 1980, we were one of the early exhibitors of computer art that was developing at the time. And so there's a renewed interest in that now, kind of revisiting that. So we're pretty open. But the sort of artist statement has to be well communicated. The images have to be very clear. Also provide just label information, just the basic, like size is actually really important, because the committee is thinking about scale. They are thinking about, does the proposal hold together, but also how is it going to fit in the space? And most exhibitions that are proposed are for the West Gallery side, the other side. This gallery is generally used for permanent collection exhibits. Sometimes we can shift that, but that's generally been the case. And then we show about 6 to 7 exhibits per year on the west side. This side can change, it's really flexible. If it's permanent, just permanent collection, we change it out every 6 months. But sometimes a special exhibit will become available that we're really interested in exhibiting, and because we own the works on this side, we can also pull them out, and we don't have to worry about contracts with artists. We can shift that, and then reinstall the permanent collection. But it's become a little flexible now, more fluid than it used to be. We have some exhibits where they've specified, they've been in the space and they've specified it's only effective because it's participatory in this gallery. So they request it. So we have to know, it helps to know that ahead of time. Or, so sometimes things like, these are kind of issues that come up. But the process is best initiated by submitting a proposal. And then if there are questions, that the artist or the curator has for the committee, you can ask it in the proposal. It can be asked then. it's actually probably more time efficient, because then the committee can talk about them, you know, and kind of figure it out, kind of what might work. And then the committee is made up of an odd number of members, and they specialize in different genre, like materials. And then I suppose if someone, you know, submitted something of which they're not a specialist, we would ask someone else to consult on that if we, you know, needed that input. So, yeah, apply if you're, you know, if you're interested, or, you know, yeah, we're always looking. Any questions, comments for any of you? I think it seems like we're kind of at a good breaking point or stopping point. Is that, yeah? Or do any of you yes, please, here. Let me. Hi.
Hi.
Sure.
I've been thinking about this question for a while now, and I'm sorry I didn't get your name, the lady with the glasses on her head. Yeah, sorry. I can really relate and resonate with, and I would love to talk to you about your experiences with CPS, because I had many years of experience with it, and I can relate to it in terms of not being able to do certain things that you're supposed to be able to do as a teacher, and that feeling of feeling confined in the system. And that kind of relates to my question about art. I've always loved art and been fulfilled by art, got different things for it that I just can't really voice therapeutically. When I was teaching for many decades, I always went to social community events to stay in touch with what was happening, meet the artists and bring them into the classroom. This was in elementary, high school, to make whatever I was teaching come alive. So I always felt that artists were the real creators. But I have to be honest, the conflict I've had in my mind is that if I look at an art piece, well, maybe it's difficult for me to look at an art piece as simply as something beautiful, as for some people. For me, it turns into, what are the therapeutic and activism aspects of this? You know what I mean? What can this art do? Just from my own social activist background and wanting to create change. So I just wondered if any of you all could comment on that.
Would anyone like to go first?
Well, actually, I was thinking Indira's foundation is important, right?
So the basis of so specifically to your question, you know, of the activism part, I mean, that's how I look at art to a great extent. But I'm looking more at the creation of it. So at least that was the formula for the Shanti Foundation. You know, it was like, in the process of making art, you can teach point of view, which was something that is very basic to nonviolence and to art. You can teach, it was always a group project, so you can teach group cooperation. So automatically the kids had to learn how to work together in order to create this particular piece of art. So that was, and when violence sprang up, that was the only time we talked about nonviolence specifically. It was more in the process. So that was sort of the activism. Personally, as I've done the community projects, for me, one of my goals is, or I had 3 goals, I don't know if I can remember all of them, to make art part of everyday life, because I think that's how I grew up, and that's so rewarding to do that, to cultivate peace as individual action, and to allow different voices to be in the process. So I think one of the things whenever I've done a public art project that I see is how fortunate we are as artists, because there are so many people who have not ever had the chance to make something. And then when you give them that opportunity, they are so grateful for that. When it should be around there all the time, that people are able to do that in whatever they're doing, you know, maybe as they are preparing dinner, the way they prepare it, meaning that art is just part of everything you do. And how do you impart that? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question of looking at art and seeing the activist element in that. It might be in the questions that you ask the students of how they can view that. That might be, because I was much more involved in the process of making art and how the process can sort of help in just the attitude and the thinking of the various students. There's someone else here?
Well, it's hard to answer your question because everyone does a different social practice differently. Now, when I don't know what else to call it, I do rituals. So I will go out with a photographer into the ground and do healing and meditation in the land, and the photographs become the memory of it, and those photographs then become the discussion of what goes through and how much can you do or not do. So you're working not as a group. I'm not working as a large group. I've tried that, and it doesn't work the way I wanted it to. So I find that if I do it individually and have pictures of it, and then I can show them and discuss it. There are lots of people who do social practices in a different way. I wish I could remember her name. She was celebrating elderly women and invited 100 women that were over 80 years old to lunch. And they went through certain rituals. She's a California artist. I forgot her name. Okay, so there are other people who do social practices in their work. But as a teacher in CPS, you have all sorts of different students coming to you. And my experience that I always was an art major and always wanted to paint, when I got into high school, and it was Mr. Jacobson, who also taught at the Art Institute, had us draw still life, not still life, but people. And that was okay. I got not great grades. It was not my forte. And I went into Mr. Balter's class, and he wanted us to work in plaster Paris. I can't work in plaster Paris. It bothers my hands so badly. I went up to him and explained I can't carve in it and I have to breathe it. I really hate it. So he put me in the back of the room with brayers and printer inks, and he said, okay, work on your own project. And when I got through working on my own project, not doing what the rest of the class was doing, I won all sorts of prizes and went on. And that was really, for me, the biggest boost that somebody has. So you really have to kind of deal with each of your students differently. They don't work necessarily as a group. That's just my experience. Did you want to speak?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Now, I could talk about CPS and teaching forever. So we'll have to have this conversation because I really can. But I felt coming into teaching, I ran across that book when I was first going for my BFA, Paulo Freire, the idea that teaching is a political act. It is from the beginning. And teaching art is more so. I felt an immense responsibility that what I was sharing with my students, this could be their only art class that they will ever have in their lives. I knew as a kid growing up on the West Side, I hardly had any art at all. To hear how some kids had drawing and sculpture and different things in elementary school and elementary school, I was like blown away. I didn't know you could do that. I went to a high school. I had to go to a Catholic high school because my mom wanted me to go there. But I said the only thing I want to do is do art. I didn't know anything about art. I just knew that when I read biographies of artists, they filled me with something that I wanted to have, and that's why I wanted to be an artist. I didn't know what it was or what it meant. And when I went to college, when I first told my dad I wanted to go to college, I said, I want to study art. And my mom is like, oh, what are you going to do? And my dad just looked at me, and well, you know my dad. You remember my dad. My dad said, well, I didn't raise any stupid kids. All I know is that you have to put a roof over your head, you got to put food on the table. You can do that, you're okay. And to me, that was carte blanche. To teach art was everything I did with those kids. I felt so, it had to be, what could they do with it? Not just, I could teach them drawing, but it wasn't just so that they could learn how to make a pretty line. It was so that they would learn how to observe. Maybe they were going to be teachers, maybe they were going to be scientists, maybe they were going to be an architect. They had to learn how to observe, to teach someone to draw, because I couldn't draw. I actually had to teach myself how to draw, because I had the sucky-ass teachers who said, you can't draw. In college, I had sucky-ass teachers who said, you can't draw, what are you doing here? And I dropped out of college. That was the reason why I dropped, because I had these teachers who, there was nothing that they wanted to share with me. I dropped out of school and went to crocheting because I said, nobody can teach me what I want to know. And it just didn't seem to exist. Everything I taught my students, I was very aware that they could leave my classroom at the end of the year, and hopefully at the end of this 1 year, they have their eyes open. And that was one of the most important things. Yeah, I was teaching them how to draw. Yeah, I was teaching them some watercolor. Yeah, I was teaching them printmaking. Yeah, I was teaching them how to make a pot. All of that was just a tool to get them to realize that they had stories in their lives that they needed to tell. And you're right, we had kids in our school. I mean, I remember, kids would just shocked me sometimes. I had a kid I'd never had any problems with. Started one day in the middle of the week, Oliver started giving me problems. And turns out, I took him in the hallway and said, okay, just talk to me. What's going on? And he said, my brother was killed yesterday. I had to come to school because my parents don't want me to get in trouble. And I said, okay, well, you're not going, I'm not going to grade you on whatever it is you're doing this week. Forget it. But later on that week or that month, as I was doing watercolor, and we were talking about, I don't know what it had to do, but it had to do with symbols. And he was using the symbols of his hands and water because of the watercolor. And he was talking about suicide and death. And it was the technique that allowed him to say his story. It didn't matter what technique it was. It could have been oil painting, whatever. But he did this amazing piece about his brother that still to this day brings me to tears. I thought, I just gave him the technique. I just gave him some ideas, some tools. Everything I thought, it is a political act. It is a political act. You get someone to speak for themselves, they are going to tell the truth. We can't, and I think we discussed this earlier, when art criticism comes around and it says, there's the pure art and then there's craft, or there's pure art and then there's this. There is no pure art. I said, none of these guys that I've read about, Clement Greenberg and Feinberg and all these guys, they don't know my experience. They don't know your experience, I would tell my students. They don't know your experience. I don't even know your experience. But you learning how to take this technique, crochet, weaving, knitting, painting, clay, whatever, you take this technique and you will speak your truth, your story. You will tell the world what it is that you want everybody else to know. And that's why there should be no definition between craft and art, because it's all expression. It's all of that. That's what I felt. So that's it in a concise thing. And that's why they fired me. That's right. You're right. Yeah, that's right.
Any other questions? Thank you. Comments, questions from anyone? Well, this has been unbelievably rich. I'm so glad you could participate, and I'm looking forward to more conversations. I'm sure this, as we have time to kind of think about this, there'll be more to talk about later. Thank you.